Khabarovsk. The design of an armored destroyer leader that could function both as a light cruiser and destroyer was in the process of being developed in the USSR during the second half of the 1930s. First Soviet leader. The idea of creating a large destroyer that could fulfill the functions of a cruiser came in the second half of the 1920s due to a shortage of such ships in the Red Navy. In December 1930, the Destroyer Leader project was approved. Her design featured 130mm or 5.1-inch guns and 533mm or 21-inch torpedoes. And it was planned for her to be capable of reaching speeds of over 40 knots. In the fall of 1932, 3 ships were laid down. Their construction posed a serious challenge for the young Soviet shipbuilding industry, but nevertheless, in December 1936, the Project 1 leader, named Leningrad, entered service. Blue Cruiser. In an effort to get acquainted with the latest achievements in the shipbuilding industry, the USSR signed an agreement in the fall of 1935 to design and build a major high-speed leader with Italy. A distinctive feature of the project was her extremely powerful propulsion that ensured speeds of over 43 knots. In January 1937, a Project 201 ship was laid down at the shipyard in Livorno, and in the spring of 1939, Tashkent arrived in Odessa. Soon, thanks to her impressive silhouette and original hull color, she was nicknamed the Blue Cruiser. Italian project. The collaboration with Italy did not stop at Tashkent. Among the offers received by the Soviet delegation was an armored reconnaissance project, the predecessor of the future Capitani Romani class Italian cruisers. The ship, with a displacement of around 4,000 tons and armed with 8 130mm guns in twin turrets, wasn't inferior in speed to Tashkent, but had the addition of side armor. The idea of an armored semi-leader, semi-cruiser was instantly taken up by the Soviet designers. Great Fleet. In the second half of the 1930s, with the strengthening of Soviet industry and growth of the country's international prestige, the shipbuilding programs of the USSR were focused on the creation of the Great Ocean-Going Fleet, which included ships of all major types. Besides battleships and cruisers, over 100 destroyers were planned to be built within 10 years. Many ships were already under construction. The destroyers of Projects 7 and 7U, Gonezhny and Subratsitelny classes, or were soon planned to be built, the destroyers of the updated Project 30, Ognyevoy class. Destroyer of the Great Fleet. In parallel with the laying down of the ships, the development of a promising destroyer for the Great Fleet was underway. In March 1940, the performance specifications for the destroyer, with her multi-purpose main battery, were approved by the People's Commissar of the Navy, Admiral Kritsenov. Later that year, the first version of the new project, Project 35, were scrutinized. Tashkent's influence was clearly visible in its outlines. According to the plan in 1941, the laying down of the lead ship of the series, destroyer Udaloy, was planned to take place. American experience. In March 1939, a Soviet delegation arrived in New York to get acquainted with the experience and technologies of the overseas power. The U.S. Navy were proud of their Mahan-class destroyers, which were equipped with multi-purpose 127mm or 5-inch guns. The Benson-class destroyers, which were even more powerful, were also in the process of being built. They had also recently adopted multi-purpose twin artillery mounts. The ideas and technological achievements of the U.S., as adopted by the Soviet specialists, could have contributed much to the qualitative strengthening of the USSR Navy. Draft designs. The development of the Armored Leader project, the concept of which was formed under the influence of Italian shipbuilding, began in the USSR in 1935. The creation of the draft design, designated number 24, was entrusted to the Central Design Bureau of Special Shipbuilding, or TSKBS-1. The Project 24 destroyer Leader was a ship with a displacement of about 3,400 tons, side armor of 50 millimeters, or about 2 inches, and armament comprising 8 130 millimeter or 5.1 inch guns in twin armored mounts, 37 millimeter or an inch and a half of anti-aircraft guns, and a quintuple tube torpedo launcher. Torpedo armament. The promising destroyer Leader was to be provided the power of both artillery and torpedo armament, with quintuple tube torpedo launchers being used for the very first time in the Soviet shipbuilding. One of the torpedo launcher variants was the 2N, an experimental product with a double-deck arrangement of torpedo tubes that was developed in the late 1930s. The tubes themselves were independently mobile and could spread at angles of up to 8 degrees, lower group, and up to 4 degrees, the upper group. Experimental 4-barrel gun. One of the most remarkable examples of the anti-aircraft artillery systems developed in the USSR was the 46K 4-barrel armored turret mount that was designed in the late 1930s. The system was primarily intended to provide AA defense for warships that had been built under the Great Fleet program. A prototype of the 46K with water-cooled barrels and a rate of fire of 100 to 120 rounds per minute was manufactured in 1940 and sent for field trials. Soviet Bofors. In 1938, the Soviet military industry created a single-barrel 37mm automatic 61K mount on the basis of the Swedish Bofors AA gun, and it was soon adopted by the Red Army. The Navy also received a similar artillery system, the 70K. During the war, these AA guns offered one of the most effective means of anti-aircraft defense in the Soviet Navy. However, back in 1940, development began on a more advanced system on the basis of the 70K, with a water-cooled twin barrel. The V-11 prototype was tested in 1944, and in 1946, the mount was adopted by the Navy. Dual-purpose artillery. Having a main battery that was capable of hitting both surface and air targets was one of the most important features of the Soviet Navy's potential light ships in development in the late 1930s, both the destroyers and leaders. The development of a multi-purpose twin turret with a caliber of 130 millimeters began in the USSR in 1939. The project of the gun, which had the designation B2U, was prepared by the Design Bureau of the Bolshevik plant, formerly the Obutkov plant in Leningrad. The B2U mount could fire 13 rounds per minute with a shell weight of 33.5 kilograms or 73.9 pounds. Armored Leader. The history of the Armored Leader didn't end with the 1936 project. With the outbreak of World War II in 1939, the military command of the Soviet Navy returned to the initiative of creating a high-speed ship that could be capable of combining the functions of a light cruiser and destroyer. In 1940, several variants of Project 47, an armored leader with multi-purpose artillery, were developed, and in many specifications, it was very similar to Project 24. But the outbreak of the Great Patriotic War prevented the ship from being embodied in metal.
Начинается! Обнаружены силы противника.
Все, кто рядом, захватываем точку.
Обнаружен линкор противника.
Наша команда получила преимущество.
Двигатель в форсированном режиме. Неполадки устранены. Дымогенератор запущен.
Вижу эсминец противника.
Постановка дымов завершена. Двигатель в штатном режиме.
Наша команда близка к победе.
Вражеский эсминец потоплен.
Башня главного калибра выведена из строя.
Вижу крейсер противника.
Минут до конца боя.